Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today, I'm going to talk about uh, that thing up there, which is an analysis of active learning with uniform feature noise. I'll explain what each of the terms in that title means as we go along. This is joint work with Barnabas Pokchos and my advisors, Larry Wasserman and Aarti Singh. The talk outline will proceed in 4 parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about what, at a high level, what we mean by feature noise. It's also known in statistics as errors in variables. And I'm going to talk about that with no active learning. So it's just errors in variables without active learning. Then in the second part, I'll talk about active learning, but without any errors in variables. In the third part, I'll marry those two together and talk about the model for active learning with errors in variables. And at the end, I'll summarize the kind of results we have. So this is going to be a fairly theoretical talk. So I'm going to try and go slowly and not overwhelm you with equations. I'll leave, of course, the proofs for the paper, but I'm going to still try and give you a feel for what the model is and how we analyze such things. The aim, again, is that there's actually been no study of what if when you were actively querying, there was noise in your features, and we'd like to know how these affect our ability to estimate something, and we'll get into the exact model now. So at a high level, errors in variables is about learning the relationship between a response y and the covariates x. Right? Usually the response is some function of the covariates. But what if you did not see the covariates exactly? That is, what you really observed was a noisy version of those covariates. So usually we assume that y is a function of x plus some noise, but we see x exactly. But what if we don't see x exactly and we also observe x with some noise? So that's what errors in variables studies. There are 2 models which are classically studied. One is, called the classical model. And in that model, you observe w and y, and your aim is to learn the relationship between between y and x. So w is actually x plus delta. You don't observe x. You observe w, which is x plus some noise, and you observe y, which is some function of x plus some noise. And so it can be captured by this kind of a graphical model. That is, there's some underlying x's being generated by some distribution. They give rise to some y's, but you don't observe those x's, you observe w's, which are some noisy version. So this is called the classical model for errors in variables. There's an alternate model, which is called the Bergson model for errors in variables. Here, it's just the first line that's twisted the other way around. So here, x is generated from w. So x is w plus delta, and y is m of x plus noise. So you don't observe x again, you observe y, you observe y and w. And it can be captured by this kind of a graphical model where there are some underlying w's which you observe. They generate the x's which generates the y's, and you observe the w's and the y's, and you want to learn you want to learn m basically. And it's basically seemingly easier to interpret active learning in this setting where you query for a w, it generates some unknown x, which generates a y, and so we're going to be working in the Bergson model. At a higher level, what motivates errors in variables is basically things like measurement error. Often the covariates that we have are themselves measured, and so there could be some noise in the measurements, there could be some noise in the communication process. And we just want to understand how can we just ignore this noise, or how does this noise affect our ability to learn M? Right, so that's errors in variables at a high level on one slide. Now what's active learning? I'm going to talk about active threshold learning. And in active threshold learning, you want to imagine that there's this one-dimensional line x. So you can think of this as being a river. And what you're going to do is you're going to take samples of water at different points in the river, and you're trying to see maybe the concentration of some chemical, and you want to see where it's high and where it's low and things like that. So maybe you take 2 samples at the end points of the river, and you get that, okay, maybe there's no chemical there, and there's a very high concentration of chemical there, something like that. So you get a negative or a positive. So you get these labels, blue and red. And you want to keep querying at different points in the river. And your aim is to find out the location at which uh, the probability of seeing a red label crosses a half. So maybe at one end, that's given by this regression function drawn in red here, which is the probability of seeing a red given x. So maybe at one end it's like 0, at the other end it's like 1. There's some point at which it crosses a half, and you really want to identify this called a threshold. You want to identify that point because it's of some inherent scientific interest or something like that. So you can imagine going around and taking samples, and sometimes you query on the right side of the threshold, and because of just some label noise, you might observe the wrong label. Because the probability of seeing a red here is not 1, it's maybe 0.8 or something, so there's some chance that you won't see the right label. And you just keep making queries of this form, and your aim is, after making a bunch of queries, you say, okay, I think that T is over here. Your aim is to identify this threshold. And you want to minimize the number of labels you need to identify that threshold exactly, right? So that's like the number of queries needed to find the decision boundary. So this is actually the Bayes optimal decision boundary. If I was to ask you what's your guess for what's left, you'd say blue, and for what's right, you'd say red. Right, so that's what active threshold learning is about. Now, when people studied active threshold learning, they just formalized it with a kind of a model. And that model is called, it's an oracle model, in which you query at a point x, you get back a label y, which is 0 or 1. Then you query at the next point x, you get back the label y, which is 0 or 1, and so on. And you make n such queries. And each of these queries, the y's comes back according to the regression function. And at the end, you output an estimator for the threshold, and you're going to measure the point error. That is, how far away are you from the true threshold? That's going to be our measure of loss. And what makes it hard typically to analyze active learning is that there's feedback involved. It's not IID, of course, so there's feedback involved, and how do you analyze rates or even design algorithms taking into account this feedback and prove rates about them. So this is what's called the oracle model for active learning. So there's no feature noise yet. This is just still vanilla active learning. Now, in order to study how difficult it is to minimize this error, we'd like to know how quickly this error goes to 0. Does it go to 0 at 1 by n, 1 by root n, something else, exponentially fast maybe? We'd like to know how fast this goes to 0 as a function of the number of queries we have, right? So there were these guys, Sibukov and Audibert and Sibukov, who realized that in some sense the difficulty of this problem is captured by the behavior of the regression function just around that threshold, and they decided to study it under what's called the Sibukov noise or margin condition. And I can tell you what that is by looking at these two slides. It's basically, in the first slide, there's a sharp jump. Okay, so there's the true regression function is like, just imagine it to be 0, then a sharp jump, then 1, which basically means I'm going to get noiseless queries. I'm just going to get blues and then reds. And that's going to be easy to identify where the true threshold is, because you can do something like binary search and identify it. In this case, it's not a jump, it's like a little flatter. And here you might get some flipped signs. So here it's going to be a little harder to identify where the threshold exactly is. And so he basically said, okay, let's try and model the behavior of the regression function around 0.5 by a polynomial of the distance to the threshold. So basically, this line just says that m of x minus a half, that is the regression function around 0.5, behaves like some polynomial of the distance to the threshold. So the k is like a parameter. You can think of k as 2 or 3 or something like that. So it behaves like a linear or a quadratic or a cubic around that threshold. And how difficult it is to identify the threshold basically depends on that parameter k. If k is 1, then it's actually the first case on the left, and it's easy. As k becomes larger, it becomes flatter, and it gets hard. And the Sibukov's noise condition basically characterizes the growth of the regression function around the threshold. So what do the optimal, so when does active learning help? As I said, flatter is harder. So in the blue setting, you can basically do something like binary search, and you can exponentially fast identify T. Um, and that corresponds to k equal to 1. Where in the green setting, when the regression function is really flat, there's basically no intelligent queries you can make, because no matter where you query in that entire region, you're getting a 50-50 chance of seeing a red or a blue. So it's like very close to 0.5 through this entire region, and so no matter where you query, you're going to see red or blue randomly, and so it's going to be very hard to get any information about exactly where t is, and that corresponds to k tending to infinity, and that's a hard setting, right? So this is captured formally by the rates. So this was a paper by Castro and Novak in Colt 2007. And the rates for, the minimax rates for active learning in one dimension, they go like this. So if the Sibikov noise condition holds for some k, then the optimal active learning rate looks like that. Maybe you don't need to remember the exact expression. It's like n to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2. So if k is 1, then it's exponentially fast. If k is 2, which means it's linear, then it's 1 by root n. And when k is infinity, it's like really flat. You actually get, it's a constant, so it doesn't go to 0. You can't identify the threshold as k tends to infinity. And similarly, if you were doing passive learning is non-active learning, which means that you're not intelligently querying, you just query at random. So you query uniformly at random, or you query on a grid or something like that that's pre-decided, so you're not using any intelligent queries. Then the minimax optimal rate looks something slightly different. Again, you don't need to remember the exact expression. It looks like n to the minus 1 by 2k minus 1. Like when k is equal to 1, instead of being exponentially fast, your error is like 1 by n. When k is 2, it's n to the minus 1/3, and it's also constant when k is infinity. So this was studied by Castro and Novak in 2007. And now we're interested in asking, how do these rates change if there was noise in the measurement process, which is included? There's already label noise. So there's already label noise in the sense that you might get flipped signs. But if there was also feature noise, that is noise in the x's, how does that affect the rates? That's the question that we were trying to ask. And maybe you can imagine feature noise as being, you want to take samples from the river, but maybe there are piranhas and alligators in the river, so you can't actually go in. So you have to fly a helicopter above and take samples, and so you have a rope dangling from the helicopter that's taking samples. So you want to take a sample from a point, but it kind of, the helicopter just gets a sample from somewhere around there with some error, maybe plus or minus 1 meter of where it intended to get the sample from. And so you want to know, okay, I have this kind of measurement error. How does that affect my rates? So so we formalize the active learning with feature noise as follows. So you can think of the domain as being -1 to 1 or minus r to r or anything like that. It doesn't matter. That's not going to affect the rates really. You have some unknown regression function m. There's a unique t such that m of t is half. So there's some point at which it crosses half. It's non-parametric otherwise, so it can actually do anything it wants and then cross half and then do anything it wants. And that's the Bayes optimal classifier. And the model works as follows. You choose W, which is the point you want to query at, and you request the label at that point. But what the oracle receives is not W, the point you queried at, but he receives W plus U. So W plus some uniform noise. So he receives X, which is W plus U. And then he returns the label of X instead of returning the label of W. So you query at W, but you get the label of some noisy version of W, which is X, right? And the noise, for now, let's take the noise to be uniform. So we wanted to start with something, and we decided to analyze it with uniform noise. Like imagine the helicopter, and it just randomly takes a point uniformly around the point that you wanted to query at. And there's some, for some known width. And we want to know also as sigma changes, how does the minimax rate for learning the threshold change? Again, the loss measure is point error. We have a simple kind of, I guess, a boundary assumption that you can't query within sigma of the boundary because it might put you outside the boundary, in which case we don't know what that means. And so you can't query out within, just at the boundaries. And passive learning, as I said, would correspond to just querying uniformly at random or querying on a grid. So what's the minimax risk? So I want to formally define it. There are, these are the only assumptions in the paper. There are no assumptions really. One of them is that the threshold is at least sigma away from the boundary. It's for the same reason that we don't know what it means if your threshold is really at the boundary and you can't query there because the noise might put you outside the boundary. It satisfies the Sibikov noise condition. So this is a two-sided Sibikov noise condition, so that you say that, okay, it grows exactly as a quadratic. It's faster than a quadratic and slower than some other quadratic, something like that. And we have this additional assumption, which is really the only assumption. The other two are just are standard. So this assumption is saying that the regression function is nicely behaved around t, which means it's anti-symmetric around t. It doesn't sharply rise on one side and then it's really slow on the other side. It basically, for whatever, if it's a quadratic, it's like the same quadratic on both sides. If it's a cubic, it's the same cubic on both. So just around the threshold, it's kind of symmetric around that point, only for a width of size sigma. So if you think of sigma as 0.01, then around the threshold of size 0.01, the regression function is well behaved there. It can do anything else, anywhere else. And we're interested in the minimax risk, which is basically the infimum over all strategies, active or passive strategies, the supremum over all distributions in this class. So this class consists of any regression function which satisfies the Sibikov noise condition and has this symmetry around the threshold. And we're looking at the expected point error loss. And we want to know how quickly does this go to 0 as a function of n. Right? So the main result is as follows. Under the Bergson error model, which is I query at W, it generates an unknown x, and I get the label of x and not of the original point W. So under the Bergson error model, given n labels sampled either actively or passively, when the true regression function lies in P of k sigma, which means that it satisfies the Sibikov noise condition with exponent k, and we have this uniform noise of width sigma, then the minimax risk is, in the passive case, it's given by n to the minus 1 by 2k minus 1 if sigma is small, and it's some function of sigma and n otherwise. And in the active case, it looks like n to the minus 1 by 2k minus 2 if sigma is small, and it looks like some other function of sigma and n otherwise. So again, I'm not expecting you to remember the exact expressions, but in some sense, there are some, maybe some remarks that one can make. When sigma is 0, you get what you expect. You get the original Castro-Novak Colt papers noiseless rates. So that's just like a feel-good factor that, okay, when there's no noise, we get exactly the same rates. It's interesting that when sigma is smaller than the noiseless error, so if you expected to get a noiseless error of 1 by root n, and your noise is actually smaller than 1 by root n, then you still get the same rate. So basically, noise doesn't hurt you if it's smaller than the noiseless error. And when noise is large, and the regression function is really flat around the threshold, then we actually get an improvement in rate with larger noise level sigma. So it's in some sense, some kind of randomization of where you're querying seems to help. On the one hand, this can be explained by, I'll show you on the next page, what I call the unflattening of the regression function. So if the true regression function is flat, then adding uniform noise can actually, convolving it with uniform noise can actually unflatten the regression function. And on the other hand, the function classes actually do get simpler because of the assumption around around the threshold, that it was symmetric around the threshold for a region of size sigma. And so I have a feeling that it's a combination of both of those factors that seems to get you an improvement in rates when sigma is large and the true regression function is very flat. So here's what I mean by unflattening due to convolution. Maybe it's easier to see on the right. So the true original regression function is the one that I'm pointing out right now. It's the one in red, which is really flat around the origin. Okay, this is just a simulated example. And when you convolve with uniform noise, it unflattens it. So this is it's the regression function if you added uniform noise. You don't know this, but this is what it ends up looking like. Because I know what it looks like, I can simulate it, and this is what it ends up looking like. And it's unflattened, so it actually ends up becoming easier to identify that threshold because it's unflattened a little bit. A few remarks about the proof techniques. So for the lower bounds, we use Castro and Novak's proof technique involving Fano's inequality to derive information theoretic lower bounds. We basically demonstrate two well-separated functions in our class that are hard to differentiate. That is the joint distribution of the observations under both those functions have small KL divergence. So even though they're well-separated, they have small KL divergence, which makes them hard to differentiate. So that's for lower bounds. For upper bounds, for the passive case, we have a variant of a histogram. Usually when you have a histogram, for passive learning, you have a histogram and you just average the number of plus or minus 1 labels you got within each bin. But here we have a variant in which instead of averaging only within the bin, we average over a larger region of width sigma. And the active upper bound is quite interesting too. What we show is that if you have any optimal passive subroutine, it could be the one that we have or any other optimal passive subroutine, then you can activize it in the sense that you can apply that passive subroutine recursively to get an optimal active subroutine. So if you have n queries, then you want to divide it into epochs and apply passive learning on the whole domain, shrink your domain, apply passive learning on the smaller domain, and so on. And you can basically get the optimal optimal active learning rate using an optimal passive learner. So you can activize the passive learner in some sense. That idea was in actually one of our earlier papers from last year. To conclude, errors in variables and active learning are both important learning paradigms, and there was no prior work studying them jointly. As a first step, we study the Bergson error model, which we feel makes more sense for active learning with uniform feature noise. We derive tight lower and upper bounds for passive and active learning under the point error loss. When the noise is small, we get standard noiseless rates. With larger noise, we apparently get better rates due to an unflattening of the regression function and the local antisymmetry around the threshold. And I guess it'll be most interesting to relax that last assumption. Thank you.
So just wondering whether your result can be extended to the higher dimensions, because you only looked at this one-dimensional threshold function.
I don't know. Yeah, the calculations here already got miserably hard. Like our appendix is not nice. I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be hard. Maybe but I think it's not the calculations were like just brute force at some points, and so if you can do brute force in higher dimensions, then that'll be great. But I haven't tried.
Because there's this one neighborly condition, right, that people look at, and it basically extends this one-dimensional threshold function to,
right.
And people could actually solve the problem for this particular condition.
Yeah.
So that might actually be helpful.
Yeah, it might. I think that's a good question. We haven't explored it yet. Yeah. Sure.
Your result about faster rates when sigma is large, does that suggest that in the noiseless setting it might be helpful to actually add noise to your features?
Yeah, so I don't think so, because we have this additional assumption that it's antisymmetric around the threshold. So if your true regression function was not antisymmetric around the threshold, what will really happen is that when you convolve with uniform noise, the threshold can shift locations. So in the sense, the noiseless threshold is at one location, and then on convolving with uniform noise, where it crosses half is at a different location, and I don't know how to solve that problem. So if the threshold changes location on convolving with uniform noise, I'm like, I don't know what to do. So it's for a technical reason that we needed that assumption, and that's why I think that in the noiseless setting, you can't just add noise, because if the regression function was not nice around the threshold, then you'd be losing. Yeah.